So our next presenter is Derek Davis, who is the Executive Director of the Program on the Legal Profession. And I see David Wilkins is here as well, which is terrific to have him here. He participates in other Joint Council events, which is great. Prior to joining HLS, Derek worked as a business attorney for more than 23 years. He was a partner for more than half of that at various law firms around Boston. He's always had a passion for the law, but he's got a lot of his passion also in comic book art, which he'll talk about here. When he's not working or painting, he's also a volunteer in many different areas, including the Board of Overseers of Boston University, where he served since 2003, and as the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Cambridge College, where he has served since 2004. Hello. There's action all around. Action all around. All right. Derek is a native of the state of New York. He received his BA in JD from Boston University across the river. And this is the first time he's talked, apparently, in public about this comic book passion of his. I'm going to get my hands on these.
I don't know why that would keep you didn't slide earlier.
Okay, well, I'm just going to hold it here for a minute. And you can take
He's
off.
the man of steel, so he should be
I'll get these. You go.
Okay, you got this one?
I got this.
This is sort of the beginning of one. All right. Well, thank you to HLS Joint Council. It's fun. I still consider myself a newbie at Harvard Law School, although I feel old. And this is going to be a more participatory event because one of you is going to take home the painting. So there's no phones, cell phones, Googling. Some of you are going to show your age by answering some of these questions. So as you can see, I love superheroes. And I love comic books. And I suppose some of you do too, right? I think everyone here has at least read a comic book, or read a strip in a Sunday paper, or magazine. How many of you have ever purchased a comic book? Raise your hands. Wow, see, 100% of you. Can you remember when you purchased your first comic book? Yes, maybe not. How many of you have your comic books? Right, show me. Okay, a couple. Okay. I don't actually watch The Big Bang, and I guess I'm a nerd. But I started painting and drawing when I was 10 years old. And I liked Goofy and Disney and Daffy Duck and the Flintstones well before The Simpsons and The Family Guy. They were very simplistic. They weren't as graphic and edgy. But then I discovered comic books, superhero comic books. And we think about them differently today because the genre has been with us for almost 100 years when you think about it, right? And it's fitting and appropriate that, today we're talking about comics because this year, in fact, just last month, we celebrated 75 years of Bob Kane's Batman. And last year, clap, no, Batman deserves an applause. And last year was 75 years of Superman. We should all look so good in spandex after 75, right? Right? These guys are ageless wonders. But for me as a young kid, when I was sitting around reading these comics books and reading these graphic sort of novels, they spoke to me in a way because I was always interested in public service and the law. Now we tweet, right? We tweet in what, 140 characters are left. I'm not my team knows I don't tweet. But 140 characters or less. And many times we tweet very meaningful things. But back in those days when comics first started and Superman appeared in the first magazine in 1938, in Little Balloons, they gave us values. They were some of our first role models, or fictitious role models, but role models just the same. So you can probably recite and finish the sentence: truth, justice, American way. Faster than a, more powerful than a, able to leap a tall building. Look at that. Right? Isn't that amazing? Because they've had such a powerful impact on our lives. In Action Comics #1, when Superman first appeared, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were these two Jewish guys from Cleveland, who worked on this character for 4 years. And it was a miserable failure each time. Every time they had a draft, DC Comics said, no way. Then in May of 1938, they said, this guy has legs. And they didn't even put Superman on the front cover. It was just a guy in a blue jumpsuit holding a green car. In 2010, one of those copies that sold in 1938 sold for $1 million. $1 million. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster sold their rights to Superman for, does anybody know? Take a guess. 1939, how much do you think they sold their rights to this great American hero. $130. $130. Now, some of you are probably Marvel fans, right? You like the mutants, the folks from another world. Well, there were always these competing characters, right? I was never a Marvel fan. Never Marvel. I mean, in fact, when you think about these heroes, and one of the reasons why they always inspired me to draw them, because they have a lot of character traits that we do. Now, not all of them are aliens. Not all of them are mutants. Some of them were just like us in this fictitious world, right? Batman lost his parents in an alley to the Joker at a very young age and spent his whole brooding life trying to redeem himself. Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, was devastated by his father's death in an Air Force, never able to commit in a relationship. And if you read in between these lines, they weren't really written for kids. They were written for us. And so we live through every crisis with them. And at the end of every comic strip, it all turned out all right. But Marvel captured something different that Detective Comics and DC never got a hold of, and that was diversity. Now, for the women in the room, I apologize. There's only one woman in all of these characters that I brought today, and we know her as Wonder Woman, right? Does anybody know when Wonder Woman first appeared? 1940. Most of the DC comics, the legends of the Justice League, does anybody know when the Justice League was formed? No? Guess? Want to take a guess? You'd be wrong. but a good guess. I mean, if I told you they were all created in the 40s, which is true, most of them between Superman and Aquaman, they all came about between 1938 and 1941. But it wasn't until 1960, which was often referred to as the Silver Age of comics, that DC Comics, after they merged all of these other comic strips, said, we need a really good team. These are great characters. Does anybody know who the original 7 characters of the JLA are? I know we have a softball team called the JLA, but does anybody know who the original set? Take a guess, quickly, anybody? Come on, somebody's got it. David, do you have? No, you're in Marvel world. Okay, it's Superman, Batman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, and the Martian Man. Now everybody says, who was the Martian Man? He appeared in, The Martian Manhunter appeared in 1955, and he's been around ever since. And throughout the years, they've mixed up the JLA, and they've added the Arrow and all these other sort of Johnny-come-lately characters. But the original team, headed by our captain, Superman, has been around since 1960. And then Stan Lee, along with a couple other characters, said, well, we've got to compete. And they created Marvel Comics, what we now know to be Marvel Enterprises, right? And what is really Marvel all about? I think I have, 2 more minutes? So we have mutants, right? We have X-Men, we have the Fantastic Four, and all of these characters, we have Thor and the Hulk and Spider-Man, but most of the characters that we know as Marvel today were created in the early 60s. And the Avengers were in fact created in, does anybody want to take a guess? You'd be wrong again. But I like the effort. What was that? The different Avengers, David, you're really dating yourself. Emma Peel. No, the Avengers were created in 1963. And they were created in response to the Justice League. Because Marvel said, we have to compete. This is a great chain, this is a great franchise, and we have to compete. And the original Avengers didn't have anybody in them that's in them today. It was Iron Man, it was Ant-Man, it was the Wasp. Right now we have a whole cadre of different people. And they found Captain America in what year in the Avengers? Does anybody know? Is anybody? Marvel number 48. Does anybody know? Okay, you're going to go again. Close, 48. Good. And where did they find Captain America in 1964 or 63? Does anybody know? Does anybody know? In a block of ice. He had been frozen since 1945 in World War II, right? And they unfreeze him, and now he's part of the Avengers. The point I want to make about Marvel, though, and Stan Lee deserves this, and he's talked about this publicly. He said his attempt at Marvel was in response to what was happening in America at the time. We all see in these characters our hopes and our aspirations, our fears, our challenges, but they're diverse. And if you think about the X-Men, these young people born with incredible superpowers, but terribly misunderstood and left out and actually attacked. It was what was going on in America in the 60s with diversity and segregation. And so Stan Lee and Ditko and all the other writers and draftsmen and cartoonists were trying to address something that was going on in their own lives and what they were seeing. So in very much a real way, X-Men is a reflection of our own society. And that's why I think we were all drawn to it. So when I think of superheroes and I pick up a magazine when I walk into Newbury Comics or Barnes & Noble, I'm always inspired, I'm always touched, and I always try to share it with a young person. And that's why I'm sharing it with you guys today, too. We're not so young. Because there's a child in all of us. And we use the word hero often much too frequently without really understanding it. And they can be little acts of kindness. We think of Clark Kent, not Superman, the real hero. I mean, this guy is incredibly humble, incredibly unique, but he does some really terrific things without jumping over a building. And we love Clark Kent, right? We do. Peter Parker, right? Gets bitten by a spider. And what's the phrase? To those to whom great responsibility comes or great power comes. There you go. You all know how to finish the line. These characters will endure, and they have endured for 75 years because they're really very much a part of us. And I think they've certainly been a big part of me, and so I'm happy to share them with you. And they're on acrylic. I usually start with a pencil, and I start with a blank canvas. I see something I like. This is a very much younger Superman. And then when I get tired or bored, I've had maybe too many scotches or too much jazz, I'll start painting. Painting is always the hardest part because you've got to mix acrylics, and acrylics dry very quickly. And then if I get really inspired, I'll finish it. And so sometimes, I'll start something in Christmas and finish it probably at Halloween the next year. They're tough. They're all different genres, different artists. There's my favorite comic and cartoon artist and illustrator is a gentleman by the name of Alex Ross. You should look at, he didn't start his stuff until 1992. And does anybody remember the Disney stores? You could go in there and buy cells, animated cells. Well, the center one, which is actually a stretched canvas strips. I went to a Disney store probably a dozen years ago, and I saw something that looked like that. It was $2,000. And I said, that's crazy. Kids can't buy that, right? So I went home, and I went to Charette's, and I bought some stretcher strips, and I stretched my own canvas, and there you have it. I've probably given a couple of those away. Remember, their trademarks, so Dean, I am not violating any copyright law. But I think I'm done, but I appreciate the opportunity to share my work, and I hope that these characters continue to inspire you like they've inspired me all these years.